Under the stone road that connects the Sphinx to the second pyramid, there is a hole in the ground. Climb down, and the air turns cold and wet. Keep going, and you reach black water that nobody has ever found the bottom of. In 1999, a team ran pumps for 2 months, drained it, and found 3 buried levels, a granite coffin sitting alone in the dark, and a single carved word that should not have been there. Then the divers went lower than the official report admits. What they filmed never reached the public. The Giza Plateau, an hour before sunrise. The tour buses are gone. The light is flat and gray. And underneath the monuments everyone takes pictures of, underneath the postcard, there is a second Giza that almost nobody sees. A buried one, made of shafts and tunnels and standing water that has been sitting in the dark for thousands of years. The Egyptians knew it was down there. They had a name for it. They called it Rastau. Rastau was the land beneath the plateau. A real place, the Egyptians believed, full of passages and flooded rooms, ruled by Osiris, their god of the underworld. They wrote his title into the stone, House of Osiris, Lord of Rastau, the Lord of the Tunnels. For a long time, scholars read that the way you read a fairy tale, symbols, religion, a story the priests told to explain what comes after this life. They were not writing poetry, they were giving directions, because the tunnels are real, and one of the ways in opens just a short walk from the paws of the Sphinx. The first person to write about it was a Greek traveler named Herodotus, almost 2,500 years ago. He came to Egypt, stood on this plateau, and the local guides told him a strange thing. Underneath the stone, they said, there was a hidden tomb, a chamber surrounded by water, fed by a channel that ran in from the river. A king was buried down there, on an island, in the dark, with the water sealing him off from the world above. Herodotus wrote it down, and most of his readers thought he had been fooled. A tall tale for a tourist who would believe anything. For more than 2,000 years, that is where it sat. A rumor in an old book. Then people started digging. In the 1930s, an Egyptian archaeologist named Salim Hassan was clearing sand off the plateau when his team broke into the top of a shaft, cut straight down into the rock. They went down one level, then another. The deeper they went, the wetter it got. At the bottom level, they hit water, black, still, and rising. They tried to pump it out. The water won. Hassan rode up what he could reach and left the rest flooded, because there was no way to beat it with the tools he had. And then something almost funny happened. The hole did not stay secret or holy. The local guides and the village children turned it into a swimming hole. On hot days, they climbed down into the cool dark and swam in the same water that had covered a pharaoh's so-called tomb. For years, people even drew their drinking water from it. A holy shaft into the underworld, used as a well. That is how forgotten this place was. And the detail everyone had missed was sitting right under their feet. The shaft is not a random hole punched anywhere on the plateau. It opens directly under the causeway of the second pyramid, the long stone road that runs down toward the Sphinx. Line it up on a map, and the mouth of the shaft sits on the path between the Great Lion and the pyramid of the pharaoh, who is said to have built it. The Egyptians did not dig down into the bedrock just anywhere. They dug here, on the line, pointing at the Sphinx. By the late 1990s, the water table under the plateau had dropped just enough to make a real attempt possible. So a team went back in, led by the Egyptian archaeologist who controlled the site, Zahi Hawass. This time, they brought powerful pumps. For 2 months, the pumps ran day and night. Hawass later said the noise, the mud, and the dust were so bad that he thought he might come out of it deaf and blind. It was, in his own words, the hardest dig of his life. Slowly, the black water dropped, and the bottom of Rastau came into the light for the first time in living memory. What they found down there is where this stops being a plain tomb. The shaft has 3 levels. The first is empty and plain, which is already strange for a structure this size, because the Egyptians carved and painted almost everything they built. The second level opens into 6 rooms cut into the rock, and inside them the team found stone coffins, pottery, beads, and human bone. Plain burial goods, dated to a few centuries before the Common Era. It is the third level, the flooded one, that does not behave. At the bottom, more than 80 feet down, the team drained the chamber and found a low platform standing in the middle of the water. 4 square pillars, a wall ringed around them, like the rail around a small island. And in the center, a single huge coffin carved from solid granite. The lid weighed tons. They moved it anyway, and when they looked inside the coffin, and then looked at the floor beneath it, they found the thing this whole story turns on. A word, one hieroglyph, cut into the rock, the sign the Egyptians used for the word house. Put plainly, somebody had marked the deepest, wettest, most hidden chamber on the Giza Plateau as a home. Not a grave, a house, the house of the Lord of the Tunnels. That matches the old title exactly. House of Osiris, Lord of Rastau. the deepest point of the shaft was never just a tomb. According to the Egyptians themselves, it was a doorway, an address for the world below, built at the exact line where the dry world meets the water. There is one other place in Egypt built like this, Abydos, far to the south. Behind a famous temple there sits a structure called the Osirion. Huge blocks of stone, granite pillars standing on a raised platform, and a channel of groundwater running all the way around it, so the platform becomes an island. It is tied to the same god, Osiris, and it does the same thing the bottom of the shaft does. It puts a stone island in dark water and calls it the home of the Lord of the Underworld. Hawass himself pointed at how alike they are. Two sites, hundreds of miles apart, both built around the same idea. An island, in the deep, where the god of the underworld lives, and the water is the part nobody likes to talk about. To pull objects out of the flooded parts, the teams could not always pump first. The story that runs through these digs, going back to Hassan in the 1930s, is that they would lower a boy down on a rope into the water-filled tomb to feel around in the dark and bring objects back up. A child, on a rope, in black water, 80 feet beneath the Sphinx's causeway, reaching for things he could not see. You would think someone would have written down exactly what was down there, in full detail. The complete record is thinner than you would expect, because the water never really leaves. The Giza Plateau sits on a rising water table, and that water has been climbing for decades. It seeps up through the limestone, fills the low chambers, and turns the bottom of every deep shaft into a flooded room. The monuments above are in danger from the same water that fills Rastau below. Engineers have spent years drilling wells and running pumps around the Sphinx, just trying to hold the groundwater down far enough to keep the statue and the temples from standing in a swamp. So when people talk about divers below the Sphinx, they are not making anything up. There really is standing water down there, deep enough to need a diver, in a network of chambers that has never been fully mapped, and that is where the story gets harder to pin down. But this was never only about one shaft. Step back from the Osiris shaft and look at the Sphinx itself, and the ground underneath it does the same thing. It refuses to be solid. Start with the body of the lion. It is carved from a single block of natural limestone, sitting in a pit that the builders cut down into the bedrock. And the walls of that pit, along with the body of the Sphinx, are covered in a strange kind of damage. Deep, rounded, wavy channels running from top to bottom, straight up and down, soft-edged. The exact shape that water leaves when it pours down a surface for a very long time. In 1991, a geologist named Robert Schoch went to Giza with the writer John Anthony West to study that damage up close. Schoch is no crank. He teaches at a university, and his field is how stone wears down over time. When he looked at the Sphinx pit, he saw something that bothered him. That pattern, he said, is rain damage. Heavy, steady rainfall, year after year, century after century, carving those soft up and down channels into the rock. The trouble is the desert. Egypt has been dry for a very long time. The kind of steady rain that could carve those channels has not fallen on this plateau since the end of the last wet period, roughly 7,000 years ago or more. The standard history says the Sphinx was carved about 4,500 years ago by the pharaoh Khafre, the same king tied to the second pyramid, but you cannot get heavy rain damage on a monument that did not exist yet when the rain stopped. To Schoch, that idea felt small at first. It was not. If the water damage is real rain damage, then the core of the Sphinx had to be standing in that pit thousands of years before Khafre was ever born. Long before the history books say there was anyone in Egypt able to cut it. Mainstream Egypt experts pushed back hard, and they still do. They argue the channels came from other causes. Salt working its way through the holes in the stone, floodwater off the Nile, wind and chemicals grinding away over the centuries. The water damage idea is not the popular one, and the people who set the official timeline are not willing to move it. But Schoch did not stop at the surface. He brought a second man to Giza, an earth scientist from Texas named Thomas Dobecki, and they did something most visitors never imagine. They put sound into the ground. They struck a steel plate with a heavy hammer, sent sound waves down through the rock under the Sphinx, and measured the echoes coming back. Solid rock and hollow space returned different sounds. By reading those echoes, they could map what the bedrock under the monument actually looks like without digging a single hole. The first thing the echoes showed was worn rock, deep under the floor of the pit, deep enough to back up Schoch's claim that the place is far older than it should be. The second thing the echoes showed was a hole. Under the left paw of the Sphinx, the sound came back wrong. There was a space down there, a hollow, and the shape of it, in the data, did not look like a natural crack in the limestone. The edges were too clean, too regular. It looked carved. A room, cut into the rock, directly beneath the paw of the lion, and still sealed. Years later, a second look at the bedrock turned up more of the same. Scans found that the rock under the Sphinx is full of holes and cracks, some of them natural, some of them lined up far too neatly to be accidents, and the data hinted at something longer, something tunnel-shaped, running underneath the body of the Sphinx, end to end. It was not even the first team to find it. 4 years before Schoch arrived, a Japanese team from Waseda University in Tokyo had run their own underground scan of the plateau. They came back reporting almost the same thing: a tunnel running north to south beneath the Sphinx, pockets of water sitting just below the surface near its hind paws, hollow space where there should be solid rock. 2 separate teams, different gear, different countries. The same answer. There are rooms and channels under the Great Sphinx. There is water down there, and at least one of those spaces under the left paw looks like it was made on purpose. What comes next is the part that still does not make sense. Because the clear move, once you find a sealed, carved chamber under the paw of the most famous statue on Earth, is to open it, drill a narrow hole, send a camera, look, and that is exactly what nobody has been allowed to do. When Schoch's hollow space hit the news, it landed on top of an older and stranger claim. Decades earlier, an American man named Edgar Cayce, who said he could see the past in a kind of trance, had told his followers that the Sphinx was far older than anyone believed, and that hidden beneath it was a sealed room. He called it a hall of records, a library, left behind by a lost world, holding the true story of where we all came from. Cayce even gave a rough date for when it would be found. Cayce had no degree, no dig, no tools. He simply said it. And then, years after he was gone, a real geologist with real tools pointed at the ground under the paw and said, "There is a carved chamber down here." That does not prove Cayce was right. He had no dig and no tools, only the claim. But you can understand why the two ideas locked together in people's minds the moment the sound readings came out. The psychic said sealed room under the Sphinx. The tools said sealed room under the Sphinx. The real question is what happened behind the parts they did not put on film. The teams that found these strange spots asked to go further, to drill a thin hole, to slide a camera into the hollow, to clear the flooded chambers properly, and record them from start to finish. And the answers came back slow, or vague, or no. The Egyptian officials admitted the readings were there, and then quietly set them aside. Permits got stuck in review. Some digs were shut down on short notice. They kept the gear and the records. The official reasons always made sense on their own. The monuments are fragile. The water is dangerous. The site is too important to risk. Every reason made perfect sense by itself. But the result of all those calm answers, stacked on top of each other, is that the most interesting spaces under the Giza Plateau have never been opened on camera for the public. The flooded shaft was filmed during the digs, so was the lowest chamber. Divers and explorers have gone down into the black water at the bottom of Rastau, with lights and cameras running. And the claim that follows this story, in every version of it, is the same. The footage from the deepest point, past where the official report stops, was never released, filed away, held back, shown to a few people, then locked in a drawer. And the strangest part is how little of it has ever been shown. What sits on the record is narrow, real carved chambers, found by real tools, under the Sphinx and its causeway. Real standing water deep enough to drown in. Real requests to look closer, met with real delays. Everything up to the edge of the dark has been written down. What lies past that edge, in the deepest flooded chambers, is the one thing nobody has been allowed to put in front of a camera. The gap is real. Something down there has been found and never opened. This is where the bigger ideas come in, and they have to be marked clearly as ideas. A handful of writers, the best known being Zechariah Sitchin, spent their careers arguing that the gods of the ancient world were not gods at all, but visitors. Beings of flesh who came from somewhere else, taught the first cities how to build and write, and left their works buried under the sand. In that reading, a sealed chamber under the Sphinx is not a tomb and not a library. It is a record left on purpose by someone who wanted it, found later. Mainstream experts reject Sitchin. They argue his translations are wrong and his evidence is cherry-picked, and that fight is not going away. So carry it as an idea, not as proven history. But it is worth noticing how often the hard evidence keeps circling back toward the same places these writers pointed at. But strip all of that away. Drop the visitors, drop the Hall of Records, drop the lost world. You are still left with a short list of plain facts that nobody really argues with. There is a shaft under the causeway of the Sphinx that drops more than 80 feet into groundwater. At the bottom of it sits a granite coffin on an island of stone, marked with the word for house. There are carved hollow spaces under the paws and body of the Sphinx that 2 separate scans both found. The stone of the monument carries water damage that does not match the date it is said to have. And every serious attempt to open the sealed parts, and film what is inside, has been delayed, denied, or quietly shelved. Every one of those facts, taken alone, has a calm, simple answer. Lined up together, they read like a warning sign that everyone has agreed not to look at directly. So go back to the beginning, back to the hole in the stone road, an hour before sunrise. Climb down into it. Feel the air turn cold. Listen to the sound change as you go down, until the only thing left is groundwater moving somewhere below you in the dark. The Egyptians stood where you are standing, and they believed that water led somewhere. They gave the place a name. They put a god in charge of it. They carved a door at the bottom and called it a house. Maybe it is only a tomb, flooded by an accident of the rock and wrapped in an old religion. Or maybe the people who built it were not telling stories at all. Maybe they were telling us, as plainly as they knew how, that there is something under the Sphinx, that it lies below the water, and that the way in has been open the entire time. The shaft is still there. The water is still rising. The chamber under the paw has still never been opened. And whatever the divers saw at the bottom of Rastau, the rest of us are still waiting to see it.